Hey, what's happening? Welcome to the Pleasure Points podcast. I'm your host, Jim Rohr. I'm stoked that you're here. We just got back from traveling. We were out in Utah and Zion and then Salt Lake City for the doTERRA convention, and going to the bathroom without the Tushy bidet, I felt like a savage. And we got back, I was just so happy, and I was just like, wow, home has really become wherever that Tushy is. This isn't a paid ad, though I am hustling for it. So Tushy Corporate, if you're out there listening, I'm plugging your stuff because I think everybody should have a healthy and wonderful pooping experience. Anyway, I'm really excited that you guys are here. This is a big episode where I talk about some of the stuff that came up for me in that Tantra healing session that I had, and some stuff that's been coming up with some clients. So I hope you find it to be useful. I love hearing what you guys think about the episodes. That Mark Oliver episode is getting a lot of feedback. It seems like he was fairly triggering to a bunch of you out there. And, the Michelle Alva one I really enjoyed having her on the show too. So you can let me know what you think of the stuff, good, bad, otherwise, at pleasurepointspodcast@gmail.com, or you can hit me up on a private message on Instagram at James E. Rohr. If you do like the show, I would love for you to rate it in Spotify or especially iTunes. It really helps to spread the word and to get better rankings and all of that stuff. So if you do take a few minutes to say nice things about the show, I really, really appreciate it. So thank you, as always, for being here, and I hope you enjoy the show. Oh, man, I'm so happy to be here with you guys. I was just rocking out to Robbie Robertson. This group organization, I guess, called Playing for Change just came out with an edited version of the band song, The Weight. And Playing for Change is awesome. I really like their stuff. They go around the world, record different musicians, all playing the same song. They edit it together. And I just saw that they came out with one of my favorite songs, The Weight. And it was done by the band. Robbie Robertson is on the video. He's playing the guitar. And, Robbie Robertson his music has a nice place in my heart because he came out with this album first, I love the band, like The Last Waltz, like, holy shit, it's amazing. That movie, the documentary of the band's final performance is like a classic. If you haven't seen it, like, rush out now and watch it. But he came out with a solo album, I think in 1994, 95. It was called Music for Native Americans. And this was like right around the time, it was probably 1996, I guess, when I started apprenticing to this Native American shaman. And so that album, I think I just listened to on repeat for like 2 years. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Yeah, the whole thing is so good. It's called Music for 1994. It's got the Coyote Dance. And if you've ever been a patient of mine and you've been on the treatment table, if we've gotten into any kind of like more esoteric energy work, you've probably heard me play either the Ancestor song or Cherokee Morning Song, which are both on that album. You can get it on Spotify. So definitely give that a listen to if you're open to kind of a slightly different take on some of the kind of Native American music. It's just so, so good. Anyway, so that's what I was listening to before I started recording. All right. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about something that came up with a client of mine the other day, and I thought it was really appropriate. There's kind of like, for the last month or so, there's different things that have been popping up that have been all kind of variations on the same theme. But anyway, so what happened with this client is she was going through the modules. She's part of the 8-week program, and she was just crushing it, like really doing deep dives into the work to, take a look at how she shows up in the world and how she might be able to show up in a way that's different, where she can communicate more clearly and have better relations all the way around, but especially when it comes to attracting a great partner. And she sent me this email that said, she said, I caught myself last night saying some really horrible things to myself. And this inner voice was insulting her weight. And I think she was, saying something about, I think she was like reaching for a cookie or something. And this inner voice just came up and said a bunch of really horrible things. And it was unnerving to my client because she doesn't normally talk to herself that way. She said that this is something that was a little unusual. And my reaction to this was actually I have compassion for her, of course, but I was also feeling a little bit of joy. I was feeling kind of some excitement around that because to me, it meant that we were starting to get to a deeper place of honesty, which is just so important to, in order to grow, in order to show up in a good way, to not be an asshole. Like, we have to be honest with ourselves. And in particular, we have to be really honest with ourselves about how much of an asshole we can be. This kind of, this thing of like embracing your shadow and embracing the darkness. And it's something that I'm like constantly trying to watch out for with myself. And it's something that I don't think I've done a very good job of until, more recently it's been coming up a little bit more. But, for me, I'm just so aware of this desire to be liked and, this kind of conditioning that I had of like, be a good boy and be nice and be kind. And the kind of praise that I got as a child when I behaved well. Of course, my parents are going to celebrate when I behave well because it's easier for them. And so this conditioning to be good and to, stay in line and to do what you should do and to not rock the boat. All of this stuff is so strong in me that it's like, it's really easy for me to turn a blind eye to how I can really be not nice or, to be a jerk or to have that darkness. And so I was working with this client on, bringing that kind of the darkness, if you will, to the light and to honor and to recognize that, yeah, we have the potential to just be really awful. And we can be awful to ourselves, and we can certainly be awful to the people around us. And for me, it's taken years of just trying to be mindful and paying attention to like really own that. Like, I remember one of my mentors when I was younger, he was talking about like some, mass shooters or even, Hitler or some, just like the people that are, our culture is just say, these people are atrocious and they're horrible people. And he was explaining to me, he said, I don't really look at it that way because I could be them. They are me, I am them, we're all in this together here. And he said, and that guy that pulls the trigger and kills a bunch of people, he's like, that could be me. I could do that. Right? So this guy that's going around pulling the trigger, like he's embodying this part that we all have inside of us. And I remember when he said that, I was just like, no way, dude. Like, I would never do that. Like, that's not me. Like, I'm not built that way. I would never do that. And, my mentor did what a mentor does. He just kind of nodded and was like, he said something cryptic, like, well, we'll see. But, you have the capacity, is his point. We all have the capacity to do horrible things. And we need to recognize that. I think it's really, really important to recognize that. And I've seen that in the coaching world. It's really easy to get upset at men who are shitty, and guys can be upset at women who, behave also in not nice ways. But part of shifting out of the victim mode is to recognize that you also have the capacity to ghost, to insult, to not play nice, to go for the weakest weak spots when you're in an argument. And the more that we can accept, accept our shadow, right? Or accept that part of us is there, when we can bring that into the conversation, just even when we're looking at ourselves. And especially if we can do it without contempt, and to just be like, wow, look at that. Like, whoo, I have a voice inside of me that is nasty. And not necessarily run to get rid of it, but just to accept it. You guys, if you've been listening, you've heard me talk about like inviting this part of us in for tea. Inviting these things into our living room so that we can get to know them. We can have a conversation rather than running and hiding and pretending that it's not there. And I saw this great, there was this great quote that kind of kickstarted a lot of some of these thoughts for me. It was this guy on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter, but I saw it reposted somewhere. His name is Steph is Dope. And he had this post that said, "You can't truly call yourself peaceful unless you are capable of great violence. If you aren't capable of violence, you're not peaceful, you're harmless." And that's an important distinction. And I really like this. I have any idea what the kind of context was that he was talking about. I didn't do a deep dive in it, but I love that. I just really appreciated that quote because there is a big distinction there. And when you can honor and recognize the damage, especially like in relationships, and the divorce really highlighted this for me, and I'm such a better, better is a shitty word, but I feel like I show up a lot better now with Jen, more in alignment, because I can recognize the kind of the damage that I can be capable of. Right? Even if I feel like I'm showing up totally fine and clean and honest and pure, like somebody could still see me as a pariah. They could still see me as anything, right? We can all be judged however, people want to judge us. And so the violence that we might be capable of might even be unintentional. But to honor and to recognize that this side is there means that when you choose to be peaceful, when you choose to be kind, it has like even more kind of oomph behind it. It's not just somebody's like quote unquote default. It's always a choice. It's always a choice. Now, we're not all necessarily trained killers, but guns are certainly accessible. Knives are around. Right? Maybe you fantasized about doing, some horrible things to people. You may not live in that state. Hopefully, you don't, because I think that's a hard way to feel good. But when those thoughts arise, for me, it's like there's a choice there. I can admonish myself. I could feel full of shame or guilt. Or I could look at it and just be like, yeah, I am a man who's capable of violence. I'm a man who's capable of doing damage. If you have a driver's license and access to a car, you are also capable of great violence. And so when we can honor this, like the darkness, then when we choose to show up and bring light into the world, it has that much more oomph behind it. There's that much more energy there. And so for this client, it was really important because she's really sweet. She's really kind, and she's just like, well, that's just kind of how I am. And, from my own upbringing, I wonder about that all the time. It's like, well, are people really just kind? Right? Or have they been so conditioned that they think that they're really kind and their actions might be consistent with that? But is like the whole energy field stifled? Is it like taking a barrel full of like pure chi and energy and trying to siphon it down or funnel it down into a tiny little spout? That tiny little spout that says, be good, be kind. And instead, when we can, take a look, when I take a look at the conditioning, when I take a look at the beliefs that I have, especially that drive to be like a good little boy or to be a good guy, to be nice. I wonder, if I'm not consciously recognizing, if I'm not giving every day the recognition of the kind of violence or destruction that I'm capable of, if I'm not really letting that breathe, then I don't know how much of being nice is really kind of authentic. All right. I don't even really like that word, but I wonder. But if we know, if we're like very walking hand in hand with that shadow and with that darkness, knowing that you're capable of doing all sorts of destruction, then every time that you don't, every time that we choose instead consciously to bring good vibes, I think that it has a little different quality to it. I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think. But something, if you listen to the podcast with Michelle Alva, the Tantra woman from, I think it was last week, Jen and I went and she gave us a Tantra session, and, they were doing some massage and some energy work on me. And at one point I remembered this great book that I read years ago called Iron John. And it's a book that became kind of a mainstay in like the men's movement, men claiming their inner warrior kind of thing. And it came out around the same time as, I think his name is Robert Moore, who did the archetypes of the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. These kind of the four main archetypes that men live with. In balance, right? We should be able to express all of them when appropriate. Anyway, Iron John is the story about this little boy and his kind of journey to manhood. And what I kept remembering was there's a scene where there's a wild man who lives like out in the dark forest, and I think he might even live like under a lake. It's been a while since I've read it. I don't really remember all the details. And somehow the wild man gets captured and he's brought back into the town. And the king and the queen lock up the wild man. And the little boy, the prince, is there in the courtyard and he's playing with his ball. And, he throws it in the air and he drops it, and the ball ends up rolling into the cage of the Iron Man, or of the wild man. And the wild man picks up the ball, and the little boy is afraid, and but he really wants his ball back. So he eventually makes his way over, and he asks the wild man for his ball back. And the wild man says, "I'll give you your ball back if you let me out of this cage." And the little boy says, "Well, I don't have the key. Where is it?" And the wild man says, "Well, the key is under your mother's pillow." And so now the little boy is confronted with a problem, right? With a choice. Does he, break into his mother's room, sneak into her bedroom and pull out the key from under her pillow? All right, breaking the law, changing the relationship that he has with her, and then going and freeing the wild man, who is clearly a prisoner, all to get his ball back. And so as they were doing this session, this is like some of the things that were flashing through my mind. And what I realized in that moment was that, I'm not in touch with the wild man in me as much as I think I need to be. That there's a part of me that's yearning to claim and own that energy much more than I give it space to. And I started crying because it's fuck, man. All this stuff, it was like I just became fully aware of this desire to be liked, and that desire to get approval. And to see again and to feel again the kind of the weight of the conditioning of the praise that I used to get as a child for every time I was good and behaved well. And I think that part of the violence comes when the wild man is not given room to roam freely. And when men aren't, we're not embodying that wild man energy in a healthy, productive way, that when it gets stifled, it can lead to some pathological behavior, if you will. because it's not expressed. And so just even recognizing that, like, feeling that knowing that there's that wild energy inside and owning it, seeing it, letting it, giving it that conscious recognition, it changes things. It's crazy. Like, this healing stuff is crazy because I used to like totally overthink like everything. And what's amazing to me now as I've gotten older is amazing how just even like identifying something, just seeing it without like putting any other crazy techniques to it, just seeing it and recognizing, oh, there's a wild man energy that I don't really let loose as much as I think I might want to. Right? I can already feel the energy stirring inside of me differently. The wild man energy is, when it's not treated in a healthy way, it can be very unsafe to culture as a whole. This is one of the things that fascinates me in my training as an anthropologist when I was in school. I remember this professor that I had my freshman year. I did my freshman year at Notre Dame, and it was like Anthropology 101. And this professor says, the purpose of culture is to allow for the continuity of itself. That's what it cares about. Culture wants to maintain culture. It's going to want to continue to propagate itself. Right? So it's not necessarily the overall sort of cultural schemes. They're not going to celebrate major individual liberties. Right? You can be out there, but only within a certain paradigm. And you go further than that and like look out. It can become problematic. And so, the kind of the wild man energy is antithetical to part of culture's purpose to propagate itself. And I think men and women, there's a fire that the wild man sits by and the wild woman. I don't know if that's a traditional archetype, but what the fuck? Why not? Let your wildness out. So there's this fire, and we have to stoke that fire. And in Chinese medicine, they talk about the Ming Men, this gate of vitality. And they talk about how in the low back is this fire for life, right? In that kind of second chakra, that Dantian area, there's that fire. And qi, energy, vitality, comes from this fire that lives inside of us, that is burning like at a sustainable rate. And it heats up water and rice in a cauldron. And as it heats up that food and fluid, cooking the rice, right? The byproduct of the alchemy with the water and the substance and the fire becomes the steam, the vapor. And it's that steam that lets off that creates qi, right? This is just one of the ways to look at what qi does and where it comes from and how it's made. But it's dependent on that fire. So a question that I was asking myself, and I'll ask you, is where might you be putting out that fire in your life? Where might you be searching for praise, trying to do things the right way, trying to do what you're told you should do, behave how you've been told to behave, at the expense of that internal fire, at the expense of that creativity, at the expense of the wildness? If you were wild, how would you show up? If you allowed that wildness to exist, what might you do differently today? Might you be more passionate in the sack? Might you go out on the date? Might you change your career or start writing the book or create the art, whatever? Or maybe you just sit a little taller. Maybe your shoulders are dropped back, chest is out. Maybe you puff up just a little bit. Not out of anger, not out of fear, not out of hostility, but out of claiming that primal nature that you have, recognizing that animal instinct, and instead of stifling it, honoring it, looking at it, knowing that you are always capable of great violence. And yet with your size, with your energy, with your vitality, when you choose to love instead, it's potent. You're not loving out of obligation, not behaving because other people would be afraid of you if you became unleashed. But you choose kindness, you choose to be soft, because that's how the wild man is choosing to interact. Breathing into that space, I mean, fuck, I feel my posture changing already. I'm getting all fired up just thinking about it. It's funny, these archetypes, you know. It's funny how all this stuff comes together. I used to really resist the archetypes, but I get that they're a convenient shorthand, right? And they can be helpful. And maybe the wild man would fall under, for men, typically the kind of the warrior energy. That's where like the new warriors, I guess now they're called the Mankind Project, and these kind of initiatory rites and these men's movements that have been popping up for the last 30 years, where they come from, banging a drum around a fire and all that. But you don't need any of that ceremony. It's not necessary. But they can be very effective ways to get you to become aware of some of the conditioning and to give you a space to be as you want to be, right? That was one of the cool things about Burning Man, right? Is that everybody's just like, you get to choose how you want to be. How do you want to show up? And if we look at the warrior archetype, when it's healthy, right, we see things like showing up with purpose and mindfulness, decisiveness, skillful, disciplined, right, and aggressive, very focused, being very clear, and it's this kind of balanced or healthy expression of the warrior that is typically super attractive, right? And so this is part of it. I mean, I've talked to thousands of women now about what they're looking for with dating and love life, and that man in the warrior energy is very attractive. And unfortunately, I think that we're missing a lot of that when I look around at what's happening. And certainly even just in my own life, I don't always stand in that place. Again, that desire to want to be liked is just so pervasive. And it makes sense. I mean, it used to be way back when that the worst punishment you could give to somebody wasn't actually to kill them. It was to excommunicate them from the tribe. It was to say, you're no longer welcome here. And that the loneliness, maybe the guilt, the shame, the embarrassment, all that stuff that might come up from being excommunicated is much more damaging and painful than actually just ending the misery and killing somebody. So I do believe that we are hardwired to want that community and to want to be liked. And it's up to, us as a community, as a village, to recognize the darkness that's there, to recognize the hurt and the pain and the conflict, and to recognize that desire to be wild and to be free, and to call it like it is if we see it. I've been working on that for myself. Instead of rushing to not be sad, to just admit, like, I'm just sad, right? I mean, shit, I don't see my kid every day. That is enough for me just to have a perpetual amount of sadness that's there, and I carry that. And when I do get to see him, I'm really present. I show up. When I'm there, I'm with him. But I also recognize that there's that sadness that's there, and that's all right. And I recognize that wanting to be liked and doing a good job and being liked has served me very well in my life. And so I'm thankful. It's nice to be liked. A lot of good things can come from that if people like you. And at the same time, I realized in that healing session and seeing some of these things that honoring the capacity to do harm, to do damage, to say mean things, or just to even put myself in a cage, emotionally, spiritually, to lock up that part of myself comes with a huge cost. Interestingly, cinnamon bark is an herb that's used in Chinese medicine to help stoke that flame, to help stoke that fire. So as we're rolling into fall here, and cinnamon becomes a flavor that's used a lot more. You might want to think about that this fall and winter as you're drinking that. Your cinnamon chai latte or whatever it is. Pour a little bit out for that wild man and that wild woman. And claim your wildness. Don't be afraid. Try not to be afraid of all of these parts of ourselves. I know I'm going back and forth a little bit between sort of the shadow and the wild man. That just isn't exactly fair. But, it's interesting. For me, it's like, well, what are the things that we sometimes pretend that we are not? And I certainly pretend sometimes that I'm not a wild man, that I'm not in that warrior energy. I'm much more comfortable as a magician, much more comfortable as a lover. Stepping into that warrior energy is much more of a conscious, it's much more of a conscious thing on my part. And just like that, the internal self-talk or saying negative things or being judgmental or being capable of violence, sometimes I like to pretend that I'm not. And that's all bullshit. And so if you have that inner voice, if you have some of that stuff pop up, let's celebrate it. Just be like, yeah, I am capable of some nastiness. And it means that when I choose to show up some other way, that there's even more heart there. There's even more alignment, even more power. But that fire is stoked not by denying who we are, but as we feed and nurture that fire, tending to that fire, and letting the flames warm us, alchemize us, and illuminate. It's just absolutely tremendous. Sorry, I got a little heavy there. Getting all feely, wanting everyone to feel good by the fire. Yeah, so that's probably enough for today. Get out there, go do some tribal dances, listen to the haka, watch the haka, the New Zealand fighting that they do before the battles. The rugby team does it before their matches. It's awesome. Or put on Braveheart, watch anything that gets you all fired up. Shit, even some big music can get you into that state, and get out there and claim that wild man, claim that wild woman in you. And you can hit me up and let me know how this is going for you. Let me know if anything resonated here. pleasurepointspodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Instagram at James E. Rohr. And if you're single and you're looking for help in manifesting bring all shades of you into the fore with that unshakable confidence, I'd love to speak with you. You can check out the masterclass at invitinginlove.com and we can take it from there. So thank you guys, as always, for being here. I'd love to hear what you like, what you don't like, what's coming up for you. And have a great one, and we'll catch you next time.